Where are you watching this from? Drop your country in the comments. And what time is it for you right now? Morning coffee, lunch break, midnight scrolling? Because no matter where you are or what hour it is, I want you to imagine something with me. Imagine you're standing in mud so thick it pulls at your boots with every step. The air smells like gunpowder and burning grass. You can hear screaming in Spanish and English, all of it tangled together into one horrible chorus. Your hands are shaking, not from cold, but from the knowledge that in the next 18 minutes, you will either be free or you will be dead. There is no middle ground anymore. There never was. This is April 21st, 1836, and you are about to fight in the shortest, bloodiest, most decisive battle in North American history. This is San Jacinto. This is where everything changed. And most people have no idea how it actually happened. Let me ask you something. Have you ever been so angry, so consumed by rage and grief that you felt like your body wasn't even yours anymore? That you were just a vessel for something darker, something unstoppable? Because that's what revenge does to a man. That's what it did to the Texans who marched towards Santa Anna's camp that spring afternoon. They weren't soldiers in the traditional sense. Most of them were farmers, shopkeepers, drifters, men who'd never worn a uniform or fired a rifle in formation. But 6 weeks earlier, they'd heard about the Alamo, they'd heard about Goliad, they'd heard about their friends, their brothers, their neighbors being slaughtered after they surrendered. And something inside them broke. Not broke like shattered, broke like a dam giving way. What came pouring out wasn't discipline or strategy, it was fury. And fury, when it's harnessed correctly, when it's aimed like a weapon, can change the course of history. But let's back up. Because to understand why San Jacinto mattered, you need to understand what Texas had become by April 1836. This wasn't a war between two organized nations. This was a revolution on the edge of collapse. The Texan army, if you could even call it that, was a ragged collection of about 800 men. Some were Americans who'd come seeking land and opportunity. Some were Tejanos, Mexican citizens who believed in federalism and opposed Santa Anna's dictatorship. Others were just drifters, adventurers, men with nothing to lose. They'd been retreating for weeks, abandoning farms, towns, families. Every step eastward felt like surrender. Every night, more men deserted. Morale wasn't low, it was nearly dead. And leading this mess was Sam Houston, a man whose reputation was as complicated as the situation he found himself in. Houston was a mystery even to the men who followed him. He'd been a governor, a congressman, a soldier in the War of 1812, where he'd fought under Andrew Jackson. But he'd also been a drunk, a failed husband, a man who'd lived among the Cherokee and taken a native name. Some of his officers respected him, others thought he was a coward. Because for weeks, Houston had done nothing but retreat. He refused to engage Santa Anna's forces. He ignored pleas from civilians to defend their homes. He kept marching his men east, deeper into Texas, closer to the Louisiana border. And with every mile, the whispers grew louder. He's running. He's given up. He's going to let Santa Anna take everything. Some of his own officers nearly mutinied. They wanted to fight. They wanted blood. But Houston kept retreating, and he never explained why. Here's what most people don't understand about retreat. There's a difference between running away and repositioning, between cowardice and patience. Houston wasn't fleeing, he was waiting. Waiting for what? For Santa Anna to make a mistake. Because Houston understood something fundamental about war. Momentum is a trap. When you're winning, when you're advancing, when everything seems to be going your way, you start believing you're invincible. You start getting careless. You start taking risks you shouldn't take. And Santa Anna was drunk on momentum. After the Alamo, after Goliad, he believed the Texan rebellion was finished. He believed Houston was beaten. And when you believe that, when you think the enemy is already defeated, you stop treating them like a threat. Santa Anna split his forces. That was his first mistake. In military terms, it's called interior lines, dividing your army to cover more ground to chase multiple objectives at once. It works if your enemy is scattered and weak, but it's catastrophic if your enemy is actually concentrated and waiting for you to spread yourself thin. Santa Anna sent columns of soldiers in different directions, each one tasked with hunting down Texan rebels and terrifying civilians into submission. His own column, about 1,300 men, pushed toward the coast, pursuing Houston's retreating army. He wanted to corner them against the Gulf of Mexico. He wanted to finish this. And in his eagerness, he marched his men hard. Too hard. They were exhausted, they were strung out, and they were about to walk into a trap they never saw coming. By April 20th, both armies had arrived at a place that seemed insignificant on a map. It was a marshy plain near the confluence of Buffalo Bayou and the San Jacinto River. There were trees to the west, water to the east, and open ground in between. Neither commander had chosen this ground strategically, they just stumbled into it. But once they were there, both realized the same thing. This was where it would happen. Santa Anna set up camp in the open. He had more men, more supplies, better training. He positioned his soldiers in a defensive line and waited for Houston to attack. He was so confident that he didn't even bother fortifying his position. No trenches, no barricades, just soldiers standing in the grass with their rifles. It was a textbook defensive setup, except for one problem. Santa Anna assumed Houston would attack in the morning, the way armies were supposed to. He didn't consider that Houston might wait, that Houston might be patient, that Houston might do something completely insane. Houston called his officers together on the night of April 20th. They argued for hours. Some wanted to attack immediately. Others wanted to wait for reinforcements. A few suggested retreating again, slipping away in the darkness. But Houston had made his decision. He was going to attack. Not at dawn, not with bugles and drums and formations marching in straight lines. No, he was going to hit Santa Anna in the afternoon, during siesta, when the Mexican soldiers would be resting, eating, half asleep in the spring heat. It was unorthodox, it was risky, it violated every principle of conventional warfare. But Houston wasn't fighting a conventional war. He was fighting a revolution, and revolutions don't follow rules. If you liked what you've heard so far, hit that like button. It helps more people discover these stories, and trust me, you're going to want to see how this ends. April 21st dawned quiet. Both camps stirred. Soldiers ate breakfast, cleaned weapons, stared across the field at the enemy. Santa Anna was still expecting an attack, but as the morning dragged into afternoon and nothing happened, he relaxed. His soldiers relaxed. They stacked their rifles, sat in the shade, played cards, napped. Some accounts say Santa Anna himself retired to his tent with a woman. Whether that's true or embellishment, we'll never know for certain. But what we do know is that by 3:30 in the afternoon, the Mexican camp was unprepared. And that's when Houston gave the order. The Texans moved forward in near silence. 800 men creeping through tall grass, using a slight ridge to mask their approach. They brought 2 cannons with them, small, outdated things called the Twin Sisters. They pushed them forward quietly, wheels wrapped in cloth to muffle the sound. Houston rode in front on a white horse, a deliberate choice. He wanted to be visible. He wanted his men to see him, to follow him. And more than that, he wanted to draw fire. If Santa Anna soldiers shot at him, they'd waste their first volley on a single target instead of the mass of men behind him. It was a calculated risk. It was almost suicidal, but it worked. They got within 200 yards before anyone in the Mexican camp noticed. 200 yards! That's the length of 2 football fields. Imagine an entire army sneaking that close without being detected. When the alarm finally went up, it was already too late. The Texans surged forward. The Twin Sisters fired, and then the Texans started screaming. Not battle cries, screaming. Remember the Alamo! Remember Goliad! It wasn't a slogan. It wasn't propaganda. It was the sound of men releasing weeks of fear, grief, and rage all at once. It was primal. It was terrifying, and it shattered whatever discipline the Mexican soldiers might have had. The Mexican lines broke almost immediately, not because they were cowards, they weren't, but because they were caught completely off guard. Half of them didn't even have their rifles. They were scrambling to form ranks, to find their weapons, to understand what was happening. Officers were shouting orders that no one could hear over the chaos, and the Texans just kept coming. They didn't stop to reload in formation. They didn't pause to regroup. They crashed into the Mexican lines like a wave, shooting, stabbing, clubbing anyone in their path. This wasn't a battle in the traditional sense. This was a slaughter. And here's the part that history textbooks often gloss over. The Texans didn't stop when the Mexican soldiers tried to surrender. They didn't accept raised hands or white flags. They kept killing. Some Mexican soldiers threw down their weapons and begged for mercy in broken English. They were shot anyway. Others tried to flee toward the bayou, only to drown in the marshes or be gunned down in the water. Houston himself tried to stop it. He rode through the chaos, shouting orders to take prisoners. But his men ignored him. They weren't soldiers anymore. They were executioners. And they didn't stop until there was no one left to kill. 18 minutes. That's how long the actual fighting lasted. 18 minutes to decide the fate of Texas. But the killing went on for hours. Mexican soldiers scattered across the plain, hiding in trees, crawling through mud, trying to escape. The Texans hunted them down. By the time night fell, over 600 Mexican soldiers were dead. Another 200 were wounded. More than 700 were captured. The Texan losses? 9 dead, 30 wounded. It wasn't a battle. It was an annihilation. Santa Anna himself fled, the self-proclaimed Napoleon of the West, the man who'd ordered the execution of prisoners at the Alamo and Goliad, ran for his life. He abandoned his uniform, his horse, everything that might identify him. He dressed in a private's clothes and tried to blend in with the fleeing soldiers. He spent the night hiding in the tall grass, terrified, alone, probably thinking about how everything had gone so wrong so quickly. The next day, a Texan patrol found him. They didn't recognize him at first, but when they brought him back to the camp, the captured Mexican soldiers started saluting him, calling him El Presidente. That's how they knew. The great Santa Anna, captured in a muddy field, wearing a private's jacket, covered in mosquito bites and shame. Houston didn't execute him. A lot of his men wanted to. They wanted Santa Anna's head on a pike. They wanted revenge for every friend, every brother, every innocent person Santa Anna's army had killed. But Houston needed him alive, because Santa Anna was the key to ending the war. With him captured, with his army destroyed, Mexico couldn't continue fighting. Not effectively. Houston forced Santa Anna to sign treaties recognizing Texas as independent. Santa Anna agreed to everything. He had no choice. He was a prisoner. And though the Mexican government later repudiated those treaties, claiming they were signed under duress, the reality was clear. Texas had won. Not just a battle, a revolution. But let's talk about what that cost, because revolutions aren't clean. They're not heroic stories where the good guys win and everyone lives happily ever after. The Texans won their independence, yes, but look at the price. Hundreds dead at the Alamo, over 300 executed at Goliad, entire families displaced, farms burned, communities destroyed. And at San Jacinto, even in victory, the Texans became the thing they hated. They became killers. They ignored surrender. They committed what today we'd call war crimes. And you can argue about whether that was justified, whether the massacre at Goliad warranted the massacre at San Jacinto. But you can't argue that war makes monsters of everyone it touches, even the winners. Subscribe if you want more stories like this, real history told the way it actually happened. Sam Houston became a hero. He became president of the Republic of Texas, then a U.S. senator when Texas joined the Union 9 years later. But he carried San Jacinto with him for the rest of his life. He was wounded during the battle. A musket ball shattered his ankle, and he walked with a limp forever after. But the real wound was deeper. In his later years, he rarely spoke about San Jacinto. He didn't brag about it the way you'd expect a victorious general to. He didn't write memoirs glorifying the battle. Maybe because he knew what it really was. Not a triumph of strategy or courage, but a triumph of rage. And rage, once it's unleashed, doesn't just go away. It lingers. It stains. Santa Anna went back to Mexico. They didn't execute him, amazingly. He even returned to power multiple times, ruling Mexico in different capacities over the following decades. But he was never the same. San Jacinto broke something in him. His reputation was destroyed, his aura of invincibility shattered. He lost a leg in a later battle against the French and had it buried with full military honors, which tells you something about his ego. But all the pomp and ceremony in the world couldn't erase the fact that he'd been humiliated in Texas, that he'd lost an entire army in 18 minutes, that he'd been found hiding in the grass like a frightened animal. And Texas? Texas became its own nation for nearly a decade before joining the United States in 1845. That annexation triggered the Mexican-American War, which in turn led to the U.S. acquiring California, Nevada, Utah, Arizona, New Mexico, and parts of Colorado, Wyoming, Kansas, and Oklahoma. So in a very real sense, that 18-minute battle didn't just create Texas, it reshaped the entire continent. It changed the trajectory of American expansion. It altered the balance of power in North America. All because a group of exhausted, furious men decided to attack during siesta. But here's the question I want to leave you with, and I really want you to think about this. Maybe even drop your answer in the comments. Was San Jacinto a victory for freedom, or just another example of how violence begets violence? Because the Texans were fighting for independence, yes. They were fighting against a dictatorship, against oppression. But they were also fighting to preserve slavery, which Mexico had abolished years earlier. They were fighting for land that originally belonged to indigenous peoples, land that Mexico had only recently taken itself. So who were the good guys? Who were the bad guys? Or is that even the right question to ask? War doesn't have clean answers. It never has. It strips away the narratives we build around it, the glory, the honor, the righteousness, and leaves only the raw truth. People kill each other. Empires rise and fall. Land changes hands. And the survivors tell stories about why it all mattered. But here's what I know for certain. San Jacinto mattered because it teaches us something about the nature of conflict, about how quickly things can change, about how a single moment, 18 minutes of chaos and bloodshed, can alter the course of history forever. Think about that the next time you hear someone say a battle was won by superior strategy or divine providence. Most battles are won by luck, by timing, by one side making a catastrophic mistake at exactly the wrong moment. Santa Anna got careless. Houston got desperate. And in that intersection of carelessness and desperation, Texas was born. The men who fought at San Jacinto didn't know they were making history. They were just trying to survive, trying to win, trying to go home. Most of them didn't care about grand narratives or manifest destiny or the future of the American continent. They cared about revenge. They cared about the friends they'd lost. They cared about proving that they weren't going to be pushed around anymore. And maybe that's what all wars really come down to. Not ideals or ideologies, but anger and fear, and the desperate need to feel like you have some control over your fate. So, what do you think? Was Houston a military genius or just lucky? Was the massacre at San Jacinto justified or an atrocity? And if you'd been there, if you'd watched your friends die at the Alamo, if you'd heard about the executions at Goliad, could you have shown mercy? Could you have taken prisoners? Or would you have been one of the men screaming, "Remember the Alamo," as you pulled the trigger? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read them all, and I genuinely want to know what you think, because these questions don't have easy answers. They never do. Before we wrap up, I want you to understand something about why this story matters today. We live in a world where borders and nations feel permanent, like they've always existed in their current form. But San Jacinto reminds us that everything is temporary, that maps are rewritten, that what seems inevitable can change in 18 minutes. Texas wasn't supposed to win. By every measure, numbers, training, supplies, experience, they should have been crushed. But they weren't. They found the moment. They seized it. They didn't wait for permission or perfect conditions. They just acted. And that's the lesson if there is one. Not that violence solves problems. It doesn't. Not that revenge is justified. It rarely is. But that history turns on moments, on decisions made in desperation, on leaders who gamble everything on one roll of the dice. Houston could have retreated again. He could have slipped away, preserved his army, waited for better circumstances. But he didn't. He attacked, and in doing so, he created a nation. The battlefield at San Jacinto is still there. You can visit it if you're ever near Houston. There's a monument, a massive stone column topped with a star, taller than the Washington Monument. It's impressive in a cold, impersonal way. But standing there, looking out over the flat coastal plain, it's hard to imagine what happened. Hard to picture the chaos, the screaming, the blood soaking into the grass. History has a way of sanitizing itself. We build monuments and museums and national holidays. We turn slaughter into heroism, desperation into strategy, luck into destiny. But the truth is always messier. The truth is that Texas was born in rage, that its independence came at a cost that's impossible to calculate, that the men who fought at San Jacinto weren't heroes or villains, they were just men. Scared, angry, exhausted men who wanted to go home. And for 18 minutes, they became something else. Something terrible and magnificent all at once. They became the storm that swept away an empire. So the next time you see a Texas flag or hear someone talk about the Alamo, or wonder why Texas has such a distinct identity compared to other states, remember San Jacinto. Remember that it all came down to one afternoon, one gamble, one moment when everything could have gone differently. That's the thing about history. It feels inevitable in hindsight, but in the moment, it's just people making choices. Sometimes those choices create nations, sometimes they destroy them, and sometimes, like at San Jacinto, they do both at the same time. One last thing before you go. Share this video with someone who loves history or someone who doesn't know this story, because these moments, these turning points, they deserve to be remembered. Not sanitized, not simplified, but understood in all their complicated, bloody human reality. That's the only way we learn from the past, by looking at it honestly, by asking hard questions, by refusing to accept simple narratives. What will you remember from this story? Will it be the 18 minutes, the revenge, the creation of Texas? Or will it be something else, something about what humans are capable of when they're pushed to the edge? Whatever it is, hold on to it, think about it, and maybe, just maybe, it'll change how you see the world around you. Because that's what history is supposed to do. Not just tell us what happened, but help us understand what's possible, what we're capable of, for better or worse. Thanks for watching, thanks for thinking, and I'll see you in the next one.